March 28, 1945. American soldiers roll into what should have been a peaceful German town. They stop their jeeps and stare up, because hanging from the street lamps are civilians, old men, women, teenagers, each one wearing a sign that reads, "Here hangs a traitor." Their crime? They tried to surrender. In that moment, the Americans make a choice that will erase an entire city from the map. No negotiations, no mercy, just artillery. By the end of this story, you'll have to answer one question, and there's no easy side to stand on. If a city murders its own people to keep fighting, do you level it to save your soldiers or walk away and let more die? Because what happened next wasn't a battle, it was a warning. And before you keep watching, I want to know this. Was the U.S. Army justified, or did they cross a line? Comment justified or war crime below. No middle ground. Now let me show you what happens when mercy runs out. Okay, so the war was supposed to be ending. Germany was collapsing from the inside. American tanks were already rolling deep into Bavaria, town after town surrendering without a fight. This was meant to be another routine entry. But when soldiers of the 45th Infantry Division reached the streets of Aschaffenburg, they slammed on the brakes. Their jeeps rolled to a stop. The men looked up. Bodies hung from the lampposts. Not soldiers, civilians. Old men, women, even teenagers, swaying gently in the cold air. Around their necks were signs, crudely written, "Here hangs a traitor." Their crime? Believing in the Americans. These people hadn't fired a single shot. They hadn't resisted. They had tried to surrender. They hung white sheets from their windows, hoping to save their homes, their families, their lives. For that, their own commander had executed them. The American soldiers stared in silence. This wasn't sadness. This was rage. Ahead of them stood a beautiful medieval fortress city, historic, ancient, proud. And in that moment, a decision was made. They weren't going to capture Aschaffenburg. They weren't going to bleed for a city that murdered its own people. The American commander lifted the radio. He didn't ask for precision. He didn't ask for restraint. He asked for everything. Level it. Turn every building into dust. If they wanted to die for Hitler, then so be it. This is the true story of the destruction of Aschaffenburg. The day the U.S. Army stopped playing by the rules. The day they met a fanatical Nazi major who refused to quit and answered him with fire. To understand why a city was erased, we have to meet the man responsible, Major Emil Lambert. Lambert wasn't a normal officer. By March 1945, most German commanders knew the war was over. They were trying to surrender with what dignity they had left. Not Lambert. He was a true believer, a fanatic. He had been placed in command of Aschaffenburg, a city on the Main River, and he carried a personal order from Adolf Hitler himself. Fortress Aschaffenburg, defend to the last stone. Lambert obeyed, literally. He didn't care about the civilians. He didn't care about the city's history. He cared only about obedience. His regular army units were gone, so he gathered anyone he could find. Volkssturm militias, old men clutching hunting rifles, boys from the Hitler Youth, barely 15, wounded soldiers dragged straight out of hospital beds. Then he issued his ultimatum. Anyone who tries to surrender will be shot. Anyone who hangs a white flag will be hanged. We fight until the Americans are dead or we are. The people of the city were terrified. They could see the American tanks approaching. They wanted to save their children. So behind locked doors, in silence, they sewed white flags. But Lambert had eyes everywhere. On the morning the Americans arrived, his execution squads flooded the streets. Doors were kicked in, families were dragged outside, people were hanged in public view. So when the U.S. 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds, entered the city on March 28th, they didn't see surrender. They saw a city held hostage by a madman. At first, the Americans were confident. Another town, another quick surrender. A small infantry unit moved into the suburbs, walking down quiet streets, windows shut, shops closed. Then a shot rang out. Then a machine gun. Then the thunderous blast of a Panzerfaust rocket. The Americans dove for cover. Fire came from everywhere. Church steeples, basement windows, sewer grates. And then came the shock. It wasn't just soldiers shooting. Old men in civilian clothes, women dropping grenades from rooftops, children firing rifles with shaking hands. Lambert had forced the entire population to fight. He told them the Americans would butcher them if they surrendered. He turned civilians into combatants. The American soldiers hesitated. They didn't want to shoot women. They didn't want to shoot kids. And because they hesitated, they died. Casualties piled up. Medics ran non-stop. What was supposed to be an easy victory turned into a meat grinder. Outside the city, American commanders gathered in a command post. They were furious. Good men were dying at the hands of civilians who should never have been in the fight. Then the scouts delivered their report. Bodies. German civilians, hanging in the town square, executed by Lambert for trying to stop the fighting. That changed everything. This was no longer a liberation. This was punishment. The American commander studied the map, his eyes fixed on one place, the massive stone fortress towering over the city, Schloss Johannesburg, Lambert's stronghold. He made his decision. No more boys were dying in those narrow streets, no medieval siege, no heroic charges. This would be done with technology, with brute force. He called in the big guns, 155mm long-tom artillery, M12 gun motor carriages, massive self-propelled cannons built to crack bunkers, and air support. A new order went out. Pull back, get out of the city. We're not taking this city, we're knocking it down. That night, the bombardment began. By morning, it wasn't a battle, it was an eraser. American guns lined the hills overlooking Aschaffenburg. They lowered their barrels and fired straight into the city. Not arcing shots, direct fire, block by block, house by house. The shells didn't just destroy buildings, they erased them. Timber-framed medieval homes disintegrated, fires spread, the city burned. Above, P-47 Thunderbolts screamed out of the sky. Inside the city, it was the apocalypse. Beneath the castle, Major Lambert sat in his bunker, shouting orders. "Hold! The Americans are weak! They're afraid to come in!" But the Americans weren't afraid. They were done. An American sergeant later wrote in his diary, "We just sat on the hill and watched it burn. After seeing those bodies on the lampposts, I didn't feel a thing. They brought this on themselves." It became one of the most controversial decisions of the war, destroying an entire city to save American lives. Was it justified, or was it excessive force? That's the hard question history leaves us with. If you want the truth, uncensored and unfiltered, this is where you're supposed to be. After days of relentless shelling, Aschaffenburg was no longer a city. It was a ruin. Streets were buried under rubble, homes were gone, fires still smoldered. Yet one structure refused to fall. Schloss Johannesburg, a massive red sandstone fortress built in the 1600s, walls 8 feet thick, 3 centuries old and still standing. Inside, Major Emil Lambert remained with his most fanatical followers, hiding behind history itself. The Americans decided to end it. They didn't send infantry to storm the gates, no ladders, no heroic charges. Instead, they rolled forward an M12 gun motor carriage, a 155mm artillery piece mounted on tank tracks. They parked it right in front of the castle, point blank. Inside the fortress, German soldiers peered through narrow arrow slits. What they saw drained the color from their faces. A massive steel barrel aimed straight at them. The first shell slammed into the main tower. Stone exploded outward. Centuries of history shattered in seconds. Dust filled the air like a red fog. Then another shell, and another. The Americans kept firing, methodically punching holes through walls that had stood for 300 years. The castle caught fire. Roof beams collapsed. Inside, chaos erupted. Wounded men screamed. Teenage soldiers cried. Some begged Lambert to surrender. "Herr Major," they pleaded, "we can't fight a wall of fire." But Lambert answered by drawing his pistol. He threatened his own men. But fanaticism has limits, and by April 3rd, his soldiers had reached theirs. That morning, the firing stopped. A white flag appeared, pushed through a jagged hole in the castle wall. The American guns went silent. Slowly, German soldiers began to emerge. They were covered head to toe in red sandstone dust. They coughed, they staggered, they looked like ghosts walking out of a grave. Then Major Lambert stepped out. Uniform still neat, medal still pinned, head held high, arrogant to the very end. He walked toward the American commander, Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks, the same man who would later help liberate Dachau. Lambert snapped a salute and began to speak about honor and duty. Sparks didn't listen. He looked past Lambert, at the smoking ruins, at the destroyed homes, at the civilians dead because one man refused to quit. Sparks didn't return the salute. He turned to his MPs and said, "Get him out of my sight before I shoot him myself." Lambert was disarmed and thrown into a jeep. As it drove away, the surviving citizens of Aschaffenburg emerged from cellars and shelters. They didn't cheer him. They spat. They screamed curses. "Murderer! You destroyed our home!" The battle for Aschaffenburg lasted 10 days. It should have lasted 10 hours. Because of one man's fanaticism, 90% of the city was destroyed. Hundreds of civilians were dead. Hundreds of American soldiers were killed or wounded. When General George Patton heard what happened, he was grimly satisfied. He toured the ruins, stared at the rubble that had once been homes, and said, "It is a good lesson. If they want to fight, this is what happens. We will not trade American lives for German buildings." From that point on, Aschaffenburg became a warning. Whenever the Third Army approached a town, a message went ahead. Remember Aschaffenburg. Surrender now, or the heavy guns come out. Most towns surrendered immediately. In that brutal way, the destruction of Aschaffenburg saved thousands of lives later in the war because it proved the Americans were not bluffing. And Major Lambert? He wasn't treated as a normal prisoner of war. He was put on trial for murder, not for killing Americans, but for executing German civilians who tried to surrender. He was found guilty, sentenced to death. Later, amid post-war confusion and appeals, his sentence was reduced to imprisonment. He lived, but in disgrace, despised by his own people. The destruction of Aschaffenburg is not a story of glory. It's a story of war's cold logic. The American soldiers didn't want to destroy a city, but when they saw bodies hanging from lampposts, when they realized they were facing a man who valued ideology over human life, they crossed a line. They stopped being liberators. They became destroyers. It's a reminder that mercy has a limit. You can push a good man too far, and when you do, you don't get negotiations. You get a 155mm shell through your front door. The commander destroyed the city to save his men. Was it the right choice? or a war crime? That debate still hasn't ended. What would you have done? Tell me in the comments. The city of Aschaffenburg is gone. 3 centuries of history leveled in 10 days. Hundreds of civilians dead. Hundreds of American soldiers lost. All because one man refused to quit. Major Lambert hanged his own people, and the Americans answered with fire. Now here's the question that matters. If you were in that American commander's shoes, would you have destroyed the city to save your soldiers, or tried to find another way? There's no right answer. There's only the choice you would have made. I want you to pick a side. Comment below, "I would destroy it," or "I wouldn't touch it," and tell me why. Your answer could spark a debate that's bigger than the story itself. And if you think this story was shocking, wait until you see what happened at Dachau. Click the video right here to see how the Americans took revenge next. But first, I need your opinion. What would you have done? Comment now and let's see who's on which side. Thanks for watching.